All right, here for part 4 of our mediation lectures, using multiple mediators. So in the previous example, we saw that even though we had an indirect effect, there remained a significant direct effect. That's sometimes termed partial mediation. This indicates that after we've included our one mediator, there's still effects left to mediate potentially. So that might indicate that anxiety only partially explains the contact-attitude relationship. And it could also suggest that other factors may further explain the relationship. This section demonstrates how multiple mediator models are an extension of the single mediator case. And we're also going to see situations where we can explore contrasts between indirect effects. That is directly comparing them to say that one is bigger than the other, just like we would do if we had an ANOVA with multiple levels and we wanted to compare the means across levels. And additionally, we'll discuss missing data handling as well. So here's a nice theoretical example which shows situations where we might expect multiple mediators. This is a figure from a version of integrated threat theory, or more recently it's been renamed intergroup threat theory. The core idea is that a lot of stuff influences attitudes. And there's 4 key issues that mediate those relationships. You can see the stuff on the left. One of those things is contact, a predictor that we've been talking about. All the way on the right are attitudes, and the intervening variables, the variables in between them, those would be statistically the mediator variables. Here we have realistic threats, symbolic threats, intergroup anxiety, which we looked at earlier, and negative stereotyping. The idea here being that the factors on the left influence the factors in the middle, which in turn influence attitudes. So we're going to examine just one of the predictors. We'll continue to examine quality of contact, but we're going to have all 4 of these mediators in our model, and we're still going to predict attitudes. So same predictor and outcome variable, we're just adding multiple mediators here. Now, I don't want to say it's a simple extension to do this because there's kind of a lot doing it, but we're just basically taking what we did with Levon with one mediator and adding in multiple ones. We're going to have now 4 A terms. That's going to reflect how well quality predicts each of those intervening or mediating variables. And you can see the order here is stereotyping, anxiety, symbolic threat, and realistic threat. Then we're going to have the B paths, the paths from the mediators to attitudes. And those B paths are going to be B1 through B4. Again, keeping the same order here. I would definitely recommend having a really clean order, same thing as the ones across, otherwise it gets really confusing. And then to calculate the indirect effects, it's just A1 times B1, A2 times B2. And then we also get something which is called the total indirect effect. The total indirect effect is just all of those indirect effects added together. It's how well the set of them mediate the relationship. One thing I did here is I used ABS for each of those. That says take the absolute value of that indirect path. It doesn't matter in this example, but in some cases you might have things that are in different directions, in indirect effects in different directions, and that might just simply reflect how variables are coded. They will cancel each other out if you don't get the absolute value here. Similarly, that's going to be important if we have contrasts. All right, so just to review, we're getting, at this point, all 4 A paths, 4 B paths, and then 4 individual indirect effects, as well as a total indirect effect. All right, more on the syntax. The total effect here, it's going to be C prime, and to C prime, we're going to add all of those indirect effects. And then to make this work properly, we have to make all of the mediators correlate with each other. So you can see how I've done that. All the mediators are correlated with one another. And then the contrasts here, those are simply taking a value that gets the difference between the size of one indirect effect and the size of another indirect effect. And then ultimately it's going to bootstrap them so that we can get a confidence interval around them and we can determine if they do actually differ. Again, if I had indirect effects that were going in different directions, I would make sure to add the absolute value statement to each of these so that we're comparing the actual size, because you could have two that are exactly the same size, but if one's positive and one's negative, they're going to show up as being very different, but they're not actually different in size. They're just different in terms of their direction. All right, so Lavon also gives us a way to deal with missing data. These data do have some missingness to them. Most approaches to mediation require complete data and use listwise deletion. Ooh, Lavon can deal with missing data pretty easily. In fact, very easily. We simply add to our Lavon command missing equals ML, and that's it. And we are applying maximum likelihood missing data estimation, no problem. That's really nice. We didn't have a ton of missing data in this data set. You can see for the dependent variable, there's only only 8 NA cases, only 8 cases with missing data. However, in a lot of data sets, you are going to have a lot more missing data. You might end up having to throw out a ton of people if you're using listwise. So what do we get here? One thing, again, I really like about Lavon is that it's labeling all of these effects, or I mean, we've actually supplied the labels, but it prints them out for us. So we can see that C prime remains significant, but it's weaker than it was before when it was 0.245. We can see that that C prime path is getting smaller, which means that there's been more mediation. You can see all of the A paths are significant. Then when we go down to predicting attitudes, the B paths, one thing that we see is stereotyping is not a significant predictor of attitudes. So that wouldn't meet the Barron and Kenny criteria. We can see that the others all are significant. And then we get to our different indirect effects. We can see the total indirect effect, that's excludes 0, so it is significant. We can see A1, B1. Again, the order here is important, and I wish the output was a little bit cleaner on this. The order is that we're using 1s to represent stereotyping, 2 to represent anxiety, 3 to represent symbolic threat, and 4 to represent realistic threat. So A1, B1 is the indirect effect of stereotyping, A2, B2, anxiety, and so on down the line. You can see we don't have a significant effect for stereotyping. So stereotyping is not a significant indirect effect or a significant mediator, if you prefer. Moving down for the second, for A2, B2, that's anxiety. Anxiety is significant. A3, B3 is symbolic threat, and that did also come out significant, as did realistic threat. So we've got 3 significant indirect effects. All of them as predicted by the model, except for stereotyping, which didn't come up as significant. And then the contrasts, C1 versus 2. That's the effect of stereotyping versus the effect of anxiety. We see we get a significant effect there, telling us, in this case, that anxiety was a stronger predictor than stereotyping. C1 V3 as stereotyping versus symbolic threats. That confidence interval includes 0, which tells us it's not a significantly different effect. Although stereotyping was non-significant and symbolic threat was significant, we do not have evidence to say that the effect of symbolic threat was stronger than the effect of stereotyping, or stronger. The indirect effects were stronger. So keep in mind, just one being significant and one not being significant, that's not enough to say that they are significantly different from one another. 1 versus 4, similarly, that's stereotyping versus realistic threat. Stereotyping versus realistic threat, again, is not significant, as we saw before, because the confidence interval includes 0. Then 2 versus 3, anxiety versus symbolic. 2 versus 4, anxiety versus realistic. Both of those are significant, telling us that anxiety was a stronger predictor than both symbolic threat and realistic threat. And if you look at the the values there, 0.17 versus 0.05, 0.17 versus 0.065. That's, you know, a good indication that one is bigger than the other. And then the last one, comparing symbolic and realistic, you can see we have a relatively small estimate of 0.012, and that's just A3B3 minus A4B4. And we can see again that that is not significant as well. So basically, anxiety was stronger than everything, is the takeaway there. All right, the next set of slides is going to get at a few additional issues in mediation analysis.